I first saw him somewhere along Route 54 in Kansas, a long, empty stretch of road cutting through miles of nothing. The night was pitch black, and my headlights barely reached past the fog rolling in from the fields. I had been on the road for 10 hours straight, exhaustion creeping in. I planned on pulling into the next rest stop to grab a coffee, maybe close my eyes for a bit. Then, out of nowhere, I saw him. A man standing in the middle of the road. I hit the brakes, my tires screeching against the pavement as the truck shuddered to a stop. The man stood perfectly still, not even flinching at the sound. His back was turned to me. He wore a long black coat and a matching black scarf wrapped tightly around his neck. His hands hung limply at his sides, his thin frame too still, too rigid. I honked the horn. He didn't move, didn't react, just stood there, like he was waiting. I swallowed hard. Something was wrong. I'd seen plenty of weird things on the road, but this was different. I leaned forward, gripping the wheel. "Hey, buddy, you all right?" I muttered under my breath, as if he could hear me. Nothing. I reached for my CB radio, flipping through channels. "This is Rig 297. I got a guy standing in the middle of Route 54, about 10 miles past Junction 160. No car, no flashlight. Anyone else see this?" Silence. Just static. Then, in the eerie stillness of the night, the man turned his head. Not his body, just his head. Too far. A slow, jerking motion, like his neck wasn't made to move that way. And when his face came into view, my stomach dropped, because he was grinning. It wasn't a normal smile. It was too wide, too stretched. His teeth were too small, too many, pressed together like a row of tiny needles. And his eyes were wrong. They weren't looking at me. They were looking through me, like I was already gone. I slammed my foot on the gas. The truck roared forward, tires screeching as I swerved around him. I didn't stop, didn't check my mirrors, didn't even breathe until I was miles down the road. Then, when I finally glanced at the mirror, my blood ran cold, because he was still there, standing in the road, standing in the exact same spot, like I had never left him behind at all. I drove straight through the night, didn't stop, didn't even pull over until I reached a truck stop in Greensburg, nearly an hour later. The lot was nearly empty, just a few rigs parked under the dim, flickering lights. I climbed out, my legs still shaking. I needed air, needed to convince myself that I'd just been seeing things. Then I saw the guy working the counter inside. An older man, maybe mid-60s, sitting behind the register with a cup of coffee. I walked in, my boots heavy against the tile floor. "You all right, driver?" he asked, eyeing me. I hesitated. Then, against my better judgment, I told him about the man in the road, told him about the grin, told him about how, even after driving for an hour, he was still there. The guy didn't say anything at first, just stared at me with this strange look. Then he sighed, pulled a pack of cigarettes from his pocket, lit one, took a slow drag before finally saying, "You saw him too." The air in the truck stop felt heavier. "What do you mean?" I asked, my throat dry. He exhaled smoke. Black scarf. Stands in the road. Smiles like he already knows how you're gonna die. I felt my pulse spike. The guy nodded. He's been out there for a long time. Decades, maybe more. Drivers see him at night. Sometimes they stop. Sometimes they don't. I swallowed hard. What happens when they stop? The guy's expression darkened. The ones who stop don't come back. I left without finishing my coffee. Didn't say another word. I climbed back into my rig and locked the doors. Just sat there for a long time, gripping the wheel, trying to convince myself I was still safe. Then, my CB crackled. At first, just static. Then a voice. Soft. Drawn out. Like someone speaking through a mouthful of too many teeth. "You should have stopped." I threw the truck into gear and got the hell out of there. Didn't look at the mirrors. Didn't check the road behind me. I drove for hours before I let myself breathe. But even now, even after all this time, I still think about that night. Still think about the man with the black scarf. Still wonder what would have happened if I had stopped. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone on the road, I swear to God, I see him, standing in the headlights, smiling, waiting, and next time, He won't let me drive away. I was delivering a package to a nowhere town in North Carolina, just a quick drop-off before heading back to the highway. It was the last stop on my route, a small, isolated trailer home, sitting at the end of a dirt road surrounded by trees. No streetlights, no neighbors, just a single mailbox leaning crookedly by the driveway. I pulled up, engine rumbling in the still night. The place looked off, like it had been forgotten. The trailer's windows were covered in thick curtains, and the porch light flickered like it was about to die. But the creepiest part? Every single door and window had 2x4s nailed over them, like someone was trying to keep something out. Or worse, keep something in. I grabbed the package from the passenger seat. Just as I stepped onto the porch, the front door creaked open, and an old woman peeked out. Her eyes were wide, darting side to side like she was checking to see if anyone was watching. She had thin, white hair pulled into a loose bun, and her hands were shaking. "Package," I said, holding it up. She nodded too quickly. "Yes, yes, bring it in." Something about her voice didn't sit right. I hesitated. "I can leave it here." Her face twitched. "No," she said sharply. "Inside, please." Then, in a whisper, "Hurry." Every part of me screamed not to go inside. But something about the way she was acting, I don't know. It felt like she was genuinely scared, like she was in trouble. So, against my better judgment, I stepped inside. And the second I did, she slammed the door shut. The smell hit me first. Damp wood, rotting food, something sour and metallic in the air. The inside of the trailer was dark, the only light coming from an old lamp with a yellowed shade. The place was cluttered. Stacks of newspapers, empty food cans, random furniture pushed against the walls. But the thing that made my stomach drop? Every window was covered. Thick blankets, nailed to the walls. Not just curtains, blankets, like she wanted to make sure no one could see inside. I gripped the package tightly. "Where do you want this?" She pointed toward the back room. "Set it on the table, back there." I hesitated. The hallway leading to the room was dark, the kind of darkness that felt wrong, like it was hiding something. I took a deep breath and walked forward, each step feeling heavier. And that's when I heard it. A faint scratching sound, coming from inside the back room. I stopped. My pulse thundered in my ears. "Ma'am," I called over my shoulder. "You got a pet back here?" Silence. Then, "Just set it down." Quickly. Her voice was closer now. Too close. I turned my head just slightly, and saw her standing right behind me. Her breathing was uneven, shallow, like she was trying not to make a sound, like she was listening for something else. Then she whispered, "They hear movement." I didn't ask questions. I put the package down on the floor, turned around, and walked straight for the door. I wasn't going to stay in that house 1 second longer than I had to. But just as I reached for the knob, the scratching in the back room stopped. The silence that followed was louder than anything I'd ever heard. Then, a long, slow creak, like a door opening. I didn't look. I yanked the front door open and stepped out. But before I could make it off the porch, the old woman grabbed my wrist. Her grip was shockingly strong. "Wait," she hissed. Her wide, glassy eyes darted toward the doorway. They're awake now. A slow chill crawled up my spine. Inside the trailer, the darkness at the end of the hall shifted. I couldn't see it, couldn't hear it, but I felt it. Something was in there, something that hadn't been awake before. I yanked my arm free and ran, jumped into my truck, locked the doors. The old woman stood on the porch, watching me. She didn't yell, didn't tell me to come back. She just stood there. And for the briefest moment, I thought I saw something moving behind her. Something tall, something with too many limbs, something that was watching me too. I threw the truck into reverse, tires skidding over dirt as I sped down the driveway. Didn't check my mirrors, didn't stop until I was miles away. And even then, I didn't feel safe. I checked the delivery records later. The package had no return address, no sender, no weight, just a tracking number that led nowhere. And when I searched for that old trailer home on Google Maps, it wasn't there. Just empty woods. Like it had never existed at all. I don't take delivery routes in isolated places anymore. I don't go inside houses, and I don't trust people who ask you to carry things into dark rooms, because some doors aren't meant to be opened. I was running on fumes when I spotted the gas station. It was just past 2 a.m., and I was deep in the California desert, miles away from the last town. My GPS claimed the next stop wasn't for another 50 miles, but there it was, a small, run-down station sitting just off the highway, its old neon sign flickering in the dark. I hadn't seen a building for over an hour, so where the hell had this place come from? I slowed down, my tires crunching over the cracked pavement as I pulled into the lot. The place looked abandoned. The windows were covered in grime. The paint on the walls had peeled away in strips, and the two rusted gas pumps looked older than my truck. But the lights were on, and in the window, behind the dirt-streaked glass, I saw someone watching me. I hesitated. A part of me wanted to leave, but my fuel gauge was nearly in the red. I climbed out of the cab, the dry desert air pressing down on me. The place was too quiet. No wind, no sound of insects, just a heavy, unnatural silence. I grabbed the pump nozzle. No credit card slot. Great. Prepay inside. I stepped up to the door, the bell jingling as I walked in. The air inside smelled like dust and old coffee. Shelves stood mostly empty, stocked with expired snacks and faded soda bottles. Behind the counter sat a man. Old, thin, skin tight against his bones. He was watching me, waiting. I cleared my throat. Pump 2. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stared, for an uncomfortably long time. Then, finally, in a voice too dry, too slow, "You shouldn't be here." A chill crawled up my spine. I forced a laugh. "Yeah, well, I need gas." His expression didn't change. "You should leave." His voice was flat, empty, like he wasn't giving advice, like he was giving a warning. I looked around the store. I hadn't noticed it at first, but something was off. There were no prices on anything. The fridge stocked with drinks, unplugged, and the magazines by the register, they were old. Not just a few months, decades. Covers from the 1970s, still stacked neatly like they had just been placed there yesterday. The old man spoke again, his voice lower this time. "You should go. Now." A long silence stretched between us. Then, from outside, I heard the sound of footsteps, soft, dragging, coming from behind my truck. I turned my head toward the window. The gas station lot was empty. No cars, no people, just my truck, sitting alone under the buzzing lights. Then, in the reflection of the glass, I saw something move. A shape, a tall, thin figure walking along the side of my trailer. Too slow, too smooth, like it was gliding. My breath hitched. I spun around, heart hammering. But when I looked outside, nothing was there. I backed away from the window. The old man was still watching me, still motionless. His eyes were dark, unblinking. I clenched my jaw. "You got security cameras here?" I asked. His thin lips twitched. "They don't show anything." A deep, heavy silence filled the room. I took a slow step toward the door. The old man didn't try to stop me, but just as I reached the exit, he spoke one last time. Soft, almost sad. "If you hear her, don't answer." I didn't ask what he meant, didn't want to know. I pushed the door open and stepped outside, and the air felt wrong, thicker, like the desert was holding its breath. I walked back toward the truck, my boots echoing too loudly in the stillness. Then, just as I reached the driver's side door, a voice whispered, "Help me." I froze. The voice was soft, a woman's voice, coming from the far side of my truck, from the darkness beyond the gas pumps. "Please," she whimpered. "I need help." Every instinct screamed at me to get in the truck, to leave. But something about the way she spoke, it wasn't right. Too flat, too practiced, like she was repeating a script, like she had said these words 1,000 times before. And the longer I stood there, the more I realized. The air was still silent. No wind, no insects, no sound at all, except for her voice. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to move. I yanked the door open, climbed into the cab, and locked it. My hands shook as I jammed the keys into the ignition. The second the engine roared to life, a shadow passed by my window. Tall, thin, too fast. I didn't look, didn't check my mirrors. Just threw the truck into gear and peeled out of that lot. The gas station disappeared behind me. The road stretched out, empty and endless. But the unease never left. I drove for almost an hour before I saw another car. By the time I reached a real town, my hands were still shaking. I pulled into a well-lit truck stop, stepped inside, and grabbed a coffee. Then, against my better judgment, I asked the clerk, "You know that old gas station down by Route 177? The guy gave me a strange look. "There's no station on 177. I frowned. "No, I just stopped there. About an hour back." The guy shook his head. "Driver, there ain't been a gas station there for 30 years. I left without finishing my coffee. Didn't say another word. Just got back in my rig and drove until the sun came up. I don't stop at lonely gas stations anymore. I don't answer voices that call from the dark. Because now I know, some places on the road aren't meant to exist. And the people you meet there, they don't always leave." The desert at night is a strange place. Out there, under the stars, everything feels too big, too empty. It's like you're the last person left in the world. And sometimes, when the road is too quiet, it starts to feel like something is watching. I was hauling a load through the Mojave Desert, nothing but miles of empty highway stretching in every direction. It was just after 1 a.m., the only sound in my cab the soft hum of the engine. No other vehicles. No houses, just desert and silence. Then, out of nowhere, a car appeared in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes. The truck shuddered violently, tires screeching against the pavement. The car sat dead ahead, its hazard lights flashing dimly in the dark. A black sedan, old, rusted. Its driver's side door was hanging open, like someone had just gotten out. I sat there, heart hammering. Nothing moved. No one stepped out. I grabbed my CB mic. "This is Rig 248. I got a vehicle abandoned on Route 58, about 30 miles outside Barstow. No sign of the driver. Anyone else reading me?" Silence. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. Something about the scene felt wrong, like it had been staged, like someone wanted me to stop. Then I saw it. The trunk was locked shut. Not just locked, chained, bolted down. Like someone didn't want whatever was inside to get out. A slow, sickening feeling twisted in my gut. That's when I heard it. A noise. From inside the trunk. I flipped on my high beams. The extra light cut through the darkness. And that's when I noticed the footprints. Fresh. Leading away from the car. Disappearing into the desert. Then, somewhere in the distance, a gunshot rang out. I ducked down, heart racing. The sound echoed across the open land, bouncing between the hills. Too close. I grabbed the mic again, voice shaking. "This is Rig 248. If anyone's near Barstow, I got gunfire out here. Anyone Red?" Crack. Another shot, closer this time. Then, from somewhere in the dark, footsteps. I turned my head toward the desert. The beams from my truck stretched out across the dry ground. And that's when I saw him. A man, tall, thin, holding a rifle. He was standing just at the edge of my headlights, his face hidden in shadow. His posture was too still, like he was waiting, watching me. I reached for the gear shift. The second I did, he moved. Fast, charging straight at the truck. I slammed the gas pedal. The truck lurched forward, the engine roaring to life. In my mirrors, I saw him chasing me, his long strides kicking up dust, his rifle bouncing against his shoulder. He was too fast, way too fast, and just before I lost sight of him, he smiled. The truck roared down the highway, speedometer climbing past 80. I didn't slow down, didn't check the mirrors again. I just drove. And for the next 10 miles, I kept expecting another gunshot. Kept expecting to see that black sedan in my mirrors again. But I didn't. The road stayed empty, like it had never happened at all. I didn't stop until I reached a well-lit truck stop in Barstow. Pulled in, parked, and sat there, shaking. I climbed out, grabbed a coffee, and tried to convince myself I was just seeing things. But then, a guy behind the counter saw my face and frowned. "You all right, driver?" I hesitated. Then, against my better judgment, I told him. I told him about the car in the road. Told him about the footsteps in the dark. Told him about the man with the rifle. By the time I finished, his face was pale. And when I mentioned the black sedan, he froze. "You need to call the cops," he muttered. I frowned. "What? Why?" He swallowed hard. "Because you just described a car that's been missing for 3 years. A cold chill rushed down my spine. I set my coffee down, hands shaking. The guy leaned forward, lowering his voice. 3 years ago, a woman went missing out here. They found her car in the desert, just like you described. Doors open, trunk chained shut, but no body." I felt my stomach drop. "The guy with the rifle?" I asked. The clerk's face darkened. "They never caught him." I left without saying another word. Didn't call the cops. Didn't want to know more. I just climbed back into my rig and got the hell out of Barstow. I don't stop for abandoned cars anymore. I don't check strange noises in the dark. Because now I know. Some people out in the desert don't want to be found. And some of them aren't the ones asking for help. Truck stops at night are strange places. Some are clean, bright, and full of other drivers just trying to get some sleep. Others, not so much. The kind of places where you feel like you're being watched the second you pull in, where the people inside don't look at you, but you can feel their eyes on you anyway. This was one of those places. I was passing through rural Ohio, somewhere between Columbus and nowhere. It was past midnight, and I needed fuel. The gas station was the only thing for miles. Old, run down, one flickering neon sign that barely gave off any light. But it had what I needed, so I pulled in. And that's where I made my first mistake. The second I stepped inside, I knew something was off. The clerk was watching me, not in a casual way, not in the way cashiers usually glance at truckers who look like they've been on the road too long. This was different. His eyes never left me, like he was waiting for something. I grabbed a coffee, paid for my gas, and got out of there. Didn't even wait for the receipt. The whole place made my skin crawl. I filled up the tank, stretched my legs, and climbed back into the cab. Locked the doors. Started the engine. And that's when I heard it. A soft rustling sound, coming from the sleeper cab. My stomach dropped. I sat there, hand frozen on the gear shift, listening. The rustling was subtle, barely more than a whisper of fabric. But it was there. And I knew. I wasn't alone. Slowly, I reached for the flashlight in my glove box, clicked it on, turned in my seat, my heart pounding in my ears. The sleeper cab was dark, too dark. My flashlight beam swept over the small space, and my breath caught in my throat, because in the shadows, I saw a hand. I lunged for the door handle, but the second I moved, the hand moved too. A shape shifted in the darkness. Not just one, three. 3 people, hiding in the sleeper. I didn't stop to think. I threw the truck into drive. The tires screamed against the pavement as I peeled out of the lot. Didn't look back. Didn't check if they were moving. Just drove. For the first 5 minutes, the cab stayed silent. I could feel them back there, holding their breath, waiting. Then, one of them whispered something, too low for me to hear. Then another snickered, like this was all a joke, like they weren't hiding. Like they were waiting for me to notice them. I clenched my jaw. I was in the middle of nowhere, speeding down the highway at 80 miles per hour with 3 people in my truck. My brain raced through options, but I already knew what I had to do. I grabbed the CB mic and keyed up. "This is Rig 211. I got a situation. 3 unauthorized people in my cab. Anyone near Route 23, I could use some eyes." A few seconds of silence. Then, a voice crackled through. "Get to a police station." I didn't argue. I checked the GPS. Next station was 20 miles ahead. I pressed the gas pedal harder. Didn't say a word. Didn't check the mirrors. Just focused on the road. The voices behind me were getting louder. Not talking to me. Talking to each other. Like they were deciding something. Then one of them moved. I heard the shift and wait. The sound of someone stepping forward. Close. Too close. My pulse hammered. I gripped the wheel tighter. Then, the voice right behind my seat said, "You should pull over." I didn't. I drove faster. The truck roared down the empty highway. The figures in the sleeper weren't laughing anymore. They were whispering. Then, I heard something click, a sound that made my stomach twist into knots. A knife opening. I spotted the police station before they did. A small brick building on the right, parking lot mostly empty. I didn't slow down, didn't hesitate. I pulled straight in, slammed the brakes, and threw open the door. The second I hit the pavement, a squad car's lights flashed on. The figures in the back? They didn't even try to run. By the time the officers opened the sleeper cab, all three were sitting there. Still, like they'd been waiting to be caught. One of them, a thin guy with greasy hair, just smiled. And in his hands? A knife. The cops hauled them out one by one, asked me questions, checked my truck. And you know what the scariest part was? None of them had IDs. No wallets. No bags. No trace of who they were. Like they had just appeared. I don't know what they wanted. I don't know why they got in my truck. But the thought that keeps me up at night, the thing that still makes my skin crawl, how long were they in there before I noticed? I don't stop at sketchy gas stations anymore. I don't ignore that gut feeling when something feels wrong. And I sure as hell check my sleeper cab before every trip. Because some hitchhikers don't wait on the side of the road. They wait inside your truck. I was somewhere in North Dakota, hauling a load through an empty stretch of highway with nothing but open land in every direction. No gas stations. No houses. Just flat, frozen fields stretching under the glow of my headlights. It was past midnight, and the road was dead silent. Then I saw something lying in the middle of the road. A woman's dress, neatly folded, like someone had placed it there on purpose. I slowed down, my pulse tightening. The fabric was pale, fluttering slightly in the breeze. At first, I thought maybe someone had tossed it from a car. Then, a few yards ahead, I saw a pair of shoes. Small, children's shoes, perfectly lined up, side by side. A cold chill crawled up my spine. I checked my mirrors. The highway behind me was empty. Nothing but the endless dark. I turned my high beams on, and up ahead, lying in the dirt by the shoulder, I saw more clothes. A child's jacket, a single sock, scattered, leading into the tall grass beside the road, like someone had been dragged. I pulled over, my hands gripping the wheel. Something about this felt wrong. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped out of the cab, and into the bitter cold. The wind howled across the open fields. No sound, no movement, just me and the scattered clothes. Then, from somewhere in the distance, I heard a child scream. The sound cut through the night. High, terrified, coming from the tall grass. My breath froze in my throat. Another scream, closer now. I took a step forward. Another. The grass whispered against itself, swaying in the cold wind. Something inside me screamed to go back, to get in the truck and leave. Then, from the darkness, a woman's voice called out, "Help, please, he has my daughter." Every instinct told me this was a trap, but I couldn't ignore that voice. I took another step, shining my flashlight into the grass. The beam barely cut through the shadows. Then, something moved. A shape, low to the ground, crawling. I froze. The woman's voice called out again, desperate now. "Please, he's hurting her." Then the child screamed again, louder, closer, like she was right there in the darkness. I swallowed hard, my hands shaking. I took one more step. Then, my flashlight caught something between the grass blades. A speaker. My blood turned to ice. The screams weren't real. They were recorded, playing on a loop. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't alone. I turned around, heart hammering. A shadow shifted near my truck. A figure, tall, watching. I took a step back, and another shadow moved. Then another. The grass around me stirred, not from the wind, from something else. Something moving, surrounding me. I didn't think, didn't wait. I ran, bolted for the truck. My boots slammed against the pavement, my breath sharp and ragged. The figures were moving fast now, closing in from both sides. I reached the cab, yanked the door open. and a hand grabbed my wrist. Cold, thin, fingers too long. I ripped free, throwing myself inside and slamming the door. Locked it, turned the key. The engine roared to life. And in my mirrors, I saw them. 4, maybe 5 figures, standing in the grass, not moving, not running, just watching me. Their faces were hidden in the dark, but I could feel it, feel their eyes, like they were waiting for me to step out again. I threw the truck into gear. The tires screeched against the pavement as I tore down the highway. Didn't look back, didn't check the mirrors again, just drove. And over the sound of my engine, I heard something over the CB, a voice, soft, amused. Next time, stop. I didn't sleep that night. Didn't stop driving until I hit a busy truck stop hours later. I pulled in, parked under the brightest lights I could find, tried to steady my breath. Then I checked the local news. No missing children, no kidnappings, no reports of a woman screaming for help. Nothing. Like it had never happened at all. I don't stop for strange things in the road anymore. I don't chase sounds into the dark, because now I know some screams aren't real. They're just bait. And if I had taken one more step, I wouldn't be here to tell the story.